we're familiar with this concept, right? Burden of proof. Who is the burden of proof in the court of law? Prosecution or defense, right? So the idea is that the burden lies on proving a positive claim, right? And this is typically the case in philosophy as well, right? If we're talking about existence, we say, who does the burden of proof land on, the theists or the atheists, right? And so here, the burden too would land on the theists. They're making the positive ontological claim that something does exist. So Swinburne is using this burden to support this critique. Then he says, just like the burden of proof is on the theists, the principle of credulity only applies to positive experiences, right? Instances of something existing or happening, not instances of things not happening, right? So perhaps you've heard people say this, like, a lack of evidence is not evidence for something, right? So we have to look at what we do have evidence for. So he's saying that the principle of credulity doesn't work equally for theists and atheists, right? In the case of religious experience, it only works for experiences of things, not experiences not of things, right? So making a little bit of a distinction there. Okay, the next principle he advocates for is the principle of testimony, right? So just like he thinks it's reasonable to trust our experiences, he thinks it's reasonable to believe that the experiences of others are probably as they say they are. Now, I might be a little too skeptical for this, but I'm going to do my best to defend this idea. And the idea, I think, is right in the sense that most of our knowledge does come from testimony, right? We don't experience most of what we know firsthand, right? Most of the things we know about the world we get from what we consider to be reliable sources, right? Even if those are sources on the interwebs, right? Whether it's friends, family, people we know, people we don't know, people with expertise, people without expertise, right? We are constantly relying on the testimony of others. So there's some interesting, philosophical questions about that. So like if you were, let's say you just got off a bus in a brand new city, right? And you ask somebody for directions to the beach. Hey, you are trusting the testimony that this person is giving you. And if that testimony is correct, we can say, well, then did you know how to get to the beach? Or were you just borrowing that knowledge from somebody else, right? So like there's all these questions then of how knowledge is transferred via testimony, right? Does simply hearing the testimony of others bestow their knowledge upon you, right? Because this is the other question about miracles. Maybe it's the case that you experiencing a miracle is reason for you to believe in God, but it might not be reason enough for other people to believe in God, right? So again, what role does testimony play in knowledge, right? Is it something that can be transferred? And so here he's giving us reason to think that we can receive knowledge through testimony, that we have good reason to trust, right? So the principle of testimony, though, of course, can be criticized because people are often prone to hyperbole, right? We exaggerate. Again, think of Hume, disease of the ears. We like to keep people's attention, right? Maybe you've even seen this or done this midway. You're like telling a story and you realize it's not landing, so you change it up a little bit, make it a little more exciting, right? Whatever it is, that sort of idea there. So we might think that the stories of the miraculous are just maybe things people do to get attention, or one of the other, again, many psychological motivations for telling tall tales. It's also difficult for people to accept the principle of testimony. Again, for lack of empirical evidence, because we can't always trust that what people are telling us is actually true, in the sense that they too might be mistaken about what they experienced, right? So even if you're like, well, I believe you believe that, right? Like, I believe you think that that's what's happened to you. But again, we might think that even if they're relaying what to them is an accurate representation of their experience, that might still not, again, be enough to justify your belief, right, based on their experience. And again, if we're thinking about testimony in terms of knowledge bestowal, all scripture is testimony, right? All of it. It's all stories relayed, passed down through generations, right? And so this question has big implications, right, on what we can rationally believe based on the testimony of others. Okay, but of course, then we could say, right, maybe one needs to fall back on something else. Maybe we don't need reason or rationality or some sort of like sufficient evidence bar being met. Maybe this is then where things like faith come into play, right? Maybe then it's a matter of like, okay, I have to decide right now whether or not I'm going to believe what you just told me. I have no evidence one way or the other, right? So you're going to have to just kind of go on faith, whichever way you go, right? And so this is, again, not so much like not giving a justification, but saying in reality, this is where a lot of us end up, right? Most of us, we receive the testimony, we don't have enough external evidence otherwise. And so we are put in this place, right, where we have to then make a decision. And so the question then, is that decision rational? So Swinburne understands that miracles, right, to be acts of God, would involve God actually interfering with its own creation, right? So there are already some potential issues Swinburne is aware of with the notion of miracles, right? So for example, God gave us free will. So if God intervenes, maybe not just in a law of nature, but intervenes in people's decisions, right? Their agency, like someone fires a bullet, right? And the bullet freezes. I don't know. That's a violation of a law of nature, right?